Hello watch enthusiasts. Now today I have a watch review and it's a dive watch which was kindly sent to me by Spinnaker Watches. Now I do want to make it quite clear at the beginning of this video that this watch was sent to me for free, just like the Alpha straps which I reviewed a few weeks ago. So I would like to make the point of the fact that this review is really impartial. I'm not going to be kind on the watch because it's been sent to me for free. This is simply a watch like any other that I would review. Now, this is a dive watch, and it's called the Spinnaker Hass, and that's a reference to the well-known diver Hans Hass, who was an Austrian diver who worked alongside Cousteau in developing the aqualung. So it really was a famous diver and an explorer as well. So a similar type of diver to Cousteau, who, as you know, is one of my icons, really. And this watch pays homage to him, which immediately caught my attention. So this watch has a white dial, a sort of silvery white dial. It's difficult to show you in the video, but it comes out as more of a silver than a white, and it's textured. I'll just bring it close to the camera to try and show you that. Yeah, so there is a sort of a frosted texture to the dial, which reminds me of the Grand Seiko watches, the Snowflake Grand Seikos. And I must say, I'm not usually one for white dials, but this one really is attractive and floats my boat, if you will. Now, being a dive watch, it is waterproof to 200 meters, or rather water-resistant to 200 meters, with a screw-down crown. So the crown is signed. It's signed with the Spinnaker logo, which is a picture of a sail, hence the name Spinnaker. Now, the sides of the watch are brushed, and they're brushed downwards rather than horizontally. Now, I personally would rather they were brushed horizontally, simply because I think it helps the watch look thinner and have more flowing lines. But that's just my opinion. The brushing is high quality, and the majority of the case is brushed, apart from these small beveled edges, as you can see, which are polished. And equally, the crown is fully polished rather than being brushed. Now, in order to look more vintage, they haven't fitted any crown guards, which is something I like. As crown guards, I find that they can often be quite dull. For example, I'm not one for Rolex crown guards. I never have liked them particularly. I tend to prefer older Rolexes, for example, because I like the fact they have bigger crowns and no crown guards. Now, this crown in question is a screw-down crown. So it unscrews like so, then pops out, and it can be manually wound, and isn't hackable though. So the second hand doesn't stop. And while I'm talking about the second hand is behind. I shall move the other hands to demonstrate. So we have the 24-hour counter here. As you can see, that moves with the hands. And we equally have the second hand, which is finished in orange. Now, in terms of the colours this watch can come in, it either comes in an orange dial, a black dial, or a white dial. I personally haven't been one for orange dials, but the white or the black do look great. Now, in terms of dials, the watch has that textured dial, and then also these very, very large, very thick, and very, very deep markers with lume that are filled with lume. Now, I like these a lot. And as you can see there, they're raised quite heavily above the rest of the dial, making for a very three-dimensional effect, which is rarely seen actually on watches. Usually the applied indices are fairly shallow. Now, the hands equally sit quite high off the dial, simply to be able to pass over those markers. But I do like the general look of the dial, and it's quite legible, since the hands are... I had fears when I first received the watch that it wouldn't be too legible, simply because of the hands being quite similar. But due to the colouring of the hands, one being black, one being silver, it is easily read. Now, on the other side of the watch, the left-hand side, we have Spinnaker deeply engraved in the side of the watch. It's not just laser-etched, it is deeply engraved. And I personally have never been particularly keen on on the name of watch brands being engraved in the side of watches. It's just my opinion, but I just find it gives a look which I think can be demeaning to the watch. It can make a watch look less costly than it perhaps is. Now, the bezel is 120 click bezel, and it's quite thin, and it reminds me of the old Blancpain bathyscaphes because of its thin nature. Now it clicks around very nicely. It's quite light. It can be done with one finger, for example, but I do like that. There's no play once it's in place, but it moves through those 120 clicks very easily. Now the material for the bezel insert is, as you can see, it's shiny. It is mineral crystal rather than being painted or ceramic, and I actually like this a lot because I've become somewhat disenchanted with painted bezels from smaller companies, simply because one can rarely find bezel inserts to replace them if one scratches them, and this does circumvent that issue because obviously this is going to last, and if it does get scratched, it can be repolished, and those numerals won't disappear. Now, all the numerals are lumed all around the bezel, which is something I really appreciate, having come from watches which have merely a pip at the 12 o'clock, which quickly fades at night. Now, I will show a lume shot at the end of the video to demonstrate the lume of this watch. Now, one thing would like to make a point of is the strap. This is a sort of it's a black waterproof leather strap, and though I think waterproof doesn't tend to cover most things, this strap is very water resistant. It's been treated to take on much less water than normal leather would, which is again something which I do appreciate. And a little quirk to this is this flap of leather underneath the buckle, which prevents the buckle from touching your wrist, and I suppose can help with comfort and comfort on the wrist. Now, it does flare out to 24mm from the 22, which the lugs are, which I think gives a more flowing design down from the lugs, and is definitely a very old-fashioned look. Now, the only thing I will say about this strap, which is negative, is that at first it is very stiff, and isn't the most comfortable until it's broken in. Now, the movement in this watch is a Miyota 8247, I believe, which is quite a decent movement. Miyota tend to be sneered on by a lot of manufacturers and reviewers, especially the 82 range of movements, simply because they're slightly antiquated. It has to be said, and I would agree with that. They are something of the past. But they have made an effort here. They've blued the rotor and put perlage on the main plates. And as I said, this can be manually wound, which is something I do appreciate in a watch like this. The only thing is, it manually winds even when you're screwing in the crown, which is something which doesn't show all the refinement I would perhaps want at this price point. However, one thing that I do like is the fact that the brushing is radial on the back, so it's circular, it goes around, and that's mirrored on the back of the lugs and on the top of the lugs by, again, sweeping around, which gives a certain symmetry to the front and the back, which I do like. It's a detail which I appreciate. Now, the crystal is mineral rather than being sapphire, and this is one of my more major complaints about the watch. Now, this is just that for the price of this watch, which is €495, I would expect a sapphire crystal, because companies like Steinhardt or Squale do provide sapphire crystals at a lower price than that. So that is one of my complaints. Equally, I do think that the movement, I would have appreciated to see a Miyota 9015 or perhaps an ETA for that sort of price. But I understand why this movement was used, because it gives gives the capability of having the two subdials, which I do appreciate in terms of a styling cue. But it would be interesting to see a slightly higher end mechanical movement, because one does want a certain differentiation between a watch of this price from a watch that was, say, in the £200 bracket. Now, the sides of the bezel are coin-edged, which is again something I like, and they do give a very good grip on the bezel, and are polished. Um, Now, in terms of this watch as a dive watch, I think this is actually a very, very good watch, and one which I enjoy wearing. I've worn it for a few days now, and now I have smaller wrists, um, but this watch, despite being slightly larger, um, fits me quite comfortably because of those curved lugs, which do curve down, um, and and this watch does look good on a number of NATOs and other leather straps. But in this weather, I've preferred to stick to this waterproof leather strap or a NATO strap because of the heat, and therefore one's wrist sweats. Um, I appreciate it. It's not the nicest topic to talk about, but it has to be mentioned, bearing in mind that leather doesn't really fare well when it comes to perspiration. Now, I will now show you a wrist shot to demonstrate how the watch wears on a 6.5-inch wrist. So on the wrist, it has a lug-to-lug length of 51 millimeters, which is usually more than I can handle, because usually I would say 50 is my limit. But because of the curve of these lugs, it sits quite nicely on my wrist. Now, the diameter of this watch is 43 millimeters, which will be too large for some people, but I think is quite nice, considering the shorter lug-to-lug span. Now, it is quite a deep watch, it has to be said, um, but that's primarily because of the doming on the crystal, which does push it up a bit. Um, Now, one thing that I will make a point of is that actually something that's very, very good value about this watch, and really is a strong point, is the fact that it's marine grade stainless steel, not just sort of regular steel, meaning it's more corrosion resistant than normal stainless, which is something you'd want on a dive watch of this type. Equally, at this price point, having an exhibition case back for a 200-meter diver is quite rare and difficult to do. As one can see, it's quite a thick plate of mineral crystal to withstand the pressure. Now, one advantage I will say about having the Miyota movement is that it's easily serviced and not too expensive to service, which is again something which one has to take into account with a lot of watches around the £400 or £500 point. They're not necessarily economical to own in the long run, simply because an ETA will cost about £150 to service every five years, say. So after 10 years, the watch effectively has a value of naught because you've spent the same amount in servicing, um, including depreciation. It has hit a sort of a bottom, if you will. Whereas with a Miyota movement, you can have them serviced for much less, which is again a plus. And I think this watch will appeal to people who like vintage watches, but would appreciate a watch which is vintage, but from the 70s, for example, rather than, for example, my Seiko 50 fathoms, or 55 fathoms rather, which is from the 50s, because of the orange on the dial and these larger hands, larger numerals, and so on. So it is a beautiful watch in its own right, and really one I appreciate and do thank Spinnaker for sending me, because it's just the kind of wristwatch which I like. Now I'll show you a Lume shot, because with those large numerals, it is excellent for that sort of thing. So I'll just switch to the Lume shot, and I'll be back with you. Okay, so I've now switched to the Lume shot. So I've turned the lights out. Now this is the watch with the lights out and the Lume working. So as you can see, there is Lume on the bezel, as well as on the hands, and it is actually very well loomed. But sadly, the Lume brightness isn't really there. The hands are extremely legible, but the rest of the dial does fade away rather. Now I have to say that the video isn't really doing it justice, because one can usually see it very, very well. I've just turned up the exposure there to demonstrate it a bit better. But as you can see, it's all around the dial and the bezel. Equally on the the sub-second and the 24-hour hand, there is Lume. Now I apologise for this, my camera is really playing up today. and it does make this watch very legible. My only complaint with the Lume is that it doesn't last very long. It'll last 4 hours at the very most, while things like my Orient, for example, or my Seiko will last for 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 hours. So that's one thing that I think would need correcting on this watch. Okay, so I'll conclude the video there, but this watch, I think, in conclusion, has some really brilliant features like the mineral bezel, the 200 meters water resistance with the case back. The fact the sub-seconds and the 24 hours are also great features. Equally, the case material. But I think at this price point, the only complaints I would have is the mineral crystal, the lume on the dial and the bezel needing to be upped a little bit in terms of strength, and equally perhaps a 9015 series Miyota. But apart from that, I would definitely recommend this watch for the price it is. I think it offers a very unique, very individual sort of style, which I haven't seen at this price point. I mean, one can find 70s style divers for around the £1,000 mark, or just below. But between the sort of £400 and £500 mark, they are rare, and earlier style watches are far more accessible. But for some reason, 70s divers with the orange on the dial haven't really been recreated, which is a shame because I really do love that era. But no, a very good watch for the price, despite these few niggles I would have with it. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will stress again that I really have reviewed this watch with sincerity, because I believe that that's paramount with my viewers, to be completely sincere about what I review and honest about how I feel about it. So thank you very much for watching. Do please like, share, and subscribe if you did enjoy this video and would like to see more on my channel. So thank you very much for watching. This is I'm on the Watch Guy, over and out.